Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I am joined by Dr. Feldman-Jensen, Dr. Shirley Feldman-Jensen, who is the lead author on the Next Generation Core Competencies in Emergency Management Professionals, the handbook on behavioral anchors and key actions for measurement. She is going to do a quick, or not quick, as long as it takes at this point, a presentation on the core competencies and how they apply to the mission areas. Dr. Feldman-Jensen is a mentor of mine, so I'm very happy to have her join us and do this with us today. And it's going to lead in also into more expansion into this very same subject on the core competencies as time goes on. But I'm going to turn it over without further ado to Dr. Feldman-Jensen.
Hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here with you today and to be able to share a lot more about the core competencies. Right now, I'm going to share my screen and get this started. Sorry. So the important thing about the core competencies is it really impacts what our future workforce is going to look like. And if we are concerned about our future emergency management workforce at all, because we're facing huge retirements and attrition and just the burnout from one disaster after the other within our current workforce, we need to be thinking about our future workforce and how we can build them to be more resilient and more prepared through these core competency frameworks. So my objectives today are to explain why core competencies are important for our future workforce, to differentiate core competencies from our technical competencies, because there's always massive confusion there, and to present the next generation core competencies for emergency management professionals to you, and then to discuss the use of applying the handbook of measurement for education in the future workforce development. The handbook has behavioral anchors and actions for measurement, and so we will discuss those at the end of towards the end of our talk. So as I'm sure each of you is acutely aware, the context of the risk pattern trends has been growing year after year. This chart has been taken from, I think it's American Geophysical Union, but I'm not exactly, I can't remember. But you can see that it's gone up from 1980 to 2020. The risks have completely escalated and the costs have escalated. And that has not even captured this past year, where we have had so many fires and the pandemic, etc. So that is our current picture of where disaster growth is happening. And the other context of risk pattern trends is the interactions that occur between our natural physical environments, our built environment, and our social environment. And what does that mean? That means that our natural environment is experiencing environmental stress, resource depletion, changing biodiversity, changing climates. Those things are interacting with our built environment. We have infrastructure issues that we haven't invested into. We've kicked the can down the road on maintenance, on many, many things. And we have changing demographics. More and more people are moving to urban centers and away from rural areas. More and more people are moving to where it's beautiful, like mountains, like the ocean, and rivers, where there's flooding potentials and earthquake potentials. So this changing demographic has not only put people in places where there are physical risks, the changing demographics have increased the density, and therefore the built environment is denser and the social impacts are greater. The social environment, of course, we have many changes going on there. We have information flows, they're interconnected and they're interdependent now. So all these things are interdependent and affect each other. And every time there's a change in one, it affects the others. And that's where our risk patterns are coming. And that's part of an explanation of why you see the charts going up and up to increase our risk. So when we look at the risk, how can we mitigate it? How can we prepare our future workforce for that? We need to consider core competencies for our future workforce and how we can better prepare them so they can step in from their fresh beginning roots after being educated, because many people in emergency management these days have come from another profession, or they've done a professional sidestep, or they've come with massive amounts of experience in fire or police and other areas. And so they bring a learning that came earlier. Uh, we can't, we don't have the luxury of that kind of time anymore for this new profession. We have to be very thoughtful about how we educate our future workforce so that they can, when they finish their education, they can step into those boots and be able to make decisions that impact lives and property. So what are core competencies? Core competencies were originally characterized as the collective learning in the organization. Unlike physical assets, which deteriorate over time, competencies grow, they're enhanced as they're applied and shared between the workplace environment. So it integrates thinking steps and it unifies stakeholders. Um, and it's not just a single person's learning, it's the collective. It's the collective. So a more current description, though, for core competencies embodies the collective learning that integrates and coordinates diverse skills and invests in strategies that unify a wider community. That gives rise for us to specialize within our community. In other words, we equip future emergency managers to foster more resilient communities to cope with the unexpected. Notably, core competencies are ones that are relevant to all people at all levels of service in emergency management, but they do not address all the skills needed. And further, it's unrealistic to expect that all of these competencies can be available in one single person. We really do need the team approach. So core competencies are critical to guide the development of the future workforce. They are job related and job relevant behaviors, motivation, and knowledge for the professional distinction of emergency management.
So it's the continual, the more they're applied, the stronger they get, correct?
That's correct. That's
So
correct.
the more you use them, the better the individual gets at them, but also the better the community gets by incorporation of it.
And they're more specialized. Like, for example, you're more specialized at technology things than I am. And that is an important thing to be aware of. But then I have greater policy expertise than you do. And so we become a team and balance those things. And that's part of the core competencies too. But I should have enough technology knowledge that I can understand you when you are explaining really advanced things to me.
Enough of a working knowledge to understand what's being said
Correct.
by the person that's saying it. You said something interesting as well, and you said like one person can't do all, can't be expected to work within each and be comprehensive in each one of these competencies. How do we work around that type of?
Well, and some of it is exposure. I mean, when somebody goes into medicine, you still have to have a basic knowledge of the body. Different degrees mean different things and different focus of your knowledge of that body. And maybe some people focus more on what makes health, others make focus on cellular level. You know, it starts specializing where you work together as a team. And I think it's the same thing with emergency management. And so when we distinguish the competency types, it's really important to look at this picture There's foundational competencies, which is something we should all be bringing to the table when we first start our undergraduate degrees. And that is reading, writing, and arithmetic and oratory skills. We should be able to be competent in adding and subtracting and multiplying. We should be competent in being able to read, and we should be competent in being able to speak and write in legible, in a way that communicates to other people. And of course, you're bringing those from secondary school, and you're going to grow those skills. You're going to get better at that, but those are foundational. That's what was being built in primary and secondary education. As we prepare for a professional field, core competencies come in next. And this is the piece we're talking about. The core competencies are really focused in on how we build our education structures and content around those, so that we are assured that you've at least been exposed to each one of these kind of things in a relevant way to emergency management. Technical competencies, on the other hand, are ones we think of often, really specific things that we learn through training, on the job training and in the field. And those should be ongoing. And that's where you really specialize and start getting those kind of things. For example, some people get really focused into terrorist organizations and monitoring that, and they understand all that. Other people are managing highway flow and evacuation routes and things like that. So they're different technical competencies. Others are containing infectious disease spread. You know, the emergency management realm covers a wide range of human social events. So we have to be specialized, and that can be achieved through our training. But the broader piece, our foundational knowledge, how we grow in the future and improve, those are our core foundations. So as I said before, technical competencies are unique to specific function components in the discipline, and they're important to accomplish tasks and the objectives specific to those functions of tasks. So that is really what sets it apart from core competencies. But people often get them very confused, and that's why I belabor the point for quite some time. So why are core competencies important for future workforce development? Well, really, they're a tool. They're a foundational tool to help us determine what needs to be in our curriculums, what we need to do to get our people ready to match the drivers of tomorrow's risk. And so these core competencies are called the next generation core competencies because we had a set of competencies in the early 2000s, but the drivers of risk are accelerating so much, and we see the curve of the risk chart going way up. We need competencies out there that can manage those environments, those complex dynamic environments that interface the social and the physical and the built environment at all levels by our future practitioners. And so they need more than what we've been calling our competencies, and to prepare a greater depth in our education. And so the purpose of the competencies, as I said, were to support the education processes, to provide tools that shape these workforces, and to align the research, education, and the workplace. By this, I mean, we should be in communication as educators with the practitioners of emergency management out in the field day to day. What are they seeing in the risk, in the events, in how people respond, what their capacity is, and where the gaps are? They inform us how to improve our education and preparation of the future workforce. They also inform where more study is needed and the research to be conducted. And so that core competency enables that interface between all those facets of practice, research, and educating the future workforce. And finally, we can measure the competencies with behaviors and actions, so we know that we've achieved that goal. And so they're tools. They're tools for us, both in preparation of the workforce and for educating them.
How can we utilize those tools and the competencies from those coming from the academic side or the classroom to the practitioner side, especially if they don't necessarily study the importance of application of these?
Well, I think that I'll get to that later in my talk about how they can apply it to the workplace environment, because there is an application of that for measuring those competencies in the workplace. But there is also just the interaction with the new workforce. They should be coming in with a lot more, that they don't need to go through all those hard knocks that most of us have had to learn to as we help build the profession. They haven't had to have 10 years of boots on the ground. They should be coming with that preparation already. So they're kind of jump started. It's like your grandmother teaching you things that you know now she taught you when you were a kid. It's that kind of thing. We should come in with an advanced knowledge and understanding so we can make the decisions better. Because we don't have the luxury of time. As I showed you in the risk patterns, they're escalating at an alarming rate. And they're interacting with our environment and our people. But I do want everybody to know, and I'm going to just kind of zoom through this because this is where most people's eyes glaze over, that the processes to develop these core competencies were rigorous, and they involved a lot of people, focus group, multi-study Delphi study, multi-phase Delphi study, listening sessions from students, from practitioners, from researchers, from all over the world. And this model of measurement was developed based on all the literature in those key areas. So this wasn't a fly-by-night project. It was a lot of testing. It took 5 years. And so it's not just pulled out of our hat. And we were very lucky that FEMA sponsored a lot of the pieces so that the work could be done. And to that, we give them credit for that. But there was a lot of people involved, and it was a rigorous process, and I want people to know that. So it wasn't just something I pulled out of my hat. When the studies were all done, we narrowed it down to 14 competencies, and they were all in interrelationship with each other. They were pretty much nested. So first, the category was competencies that build the individual, which is connected, of course, because if we don't take care of ourselves first and educate ourselves first, we can't be a reasonable practitioner. The next level is competencies that build the practitioner. And finally, then competencies that build relationships in our community, because community engagement is everything with emergency management. We're the interface between everything to reduce and mitigate our risk. So, competencies that build the individual. There were 4 of those competencies. The first set, operate within the emergency management framework, principles, and body of knowledge, really encompasses all the prior existing competencies, and that were developed by Wayne Blanchard in the early 2000s. So the definition of that was the emergency management professional utilizes a proactive anticipatory, and innovative approach for guiding public policy and in the application of emergency management framework and principles. Emergency management seeks to promote safer, more resilient, and thriving communities. All necessary actions are employed to mitigate against, prepare for, respond to, and recover from threatened or actual hazards. Emergency management activities must be comprehensive, progressive, risk-driven, integrated, collaborative, coordinated, flexible, and professional. Those were all things identified by Dr. Wayne Blanchard years ago when the concept of core competencies first came out. So those are vital, and those are well familiar to all of us who have been in emergency management for a long time. Is that not the case, Daniel? But now we're going to build on that. And there are 13 additional competencies because our hazardscape and our riskscape is so dynamic and changing and interacting in unexpected ways. We all must possess critical thinking. And the definition for critical thinking is the emergency management professional employs critical thinking to identify and reduce disaster risk in the communities they serve. Critical thinking is a disciplined and multifaceted intellectual process which involves problem-solving, strategic, adaptive, and innovative thinking. The practice of recognizing relevant evidence, understanding relationships in the multi-layered data, and making clear connections between potential causes and effects is fundamental to the decision-making, adaptive actions, and thriving in uncertain environments. So we in education really strive to really build that critical thinking process by our processes of understanding how education works to train the mind. And having those processes in place really enables the emergency manager to go, when the new emergency manager, let me define it that way, the newly minted emergency manager to come out and be able to assess the situation and run it through all the thinking processes they know, so that they can actually have a handle on where those connections are and potential causes, and make informed decisions.
I think that's important too, just to point out real quick that, and this is in general, this isn't just a, but how it's an intentional process, and it's an intentional response to a situation versus a reaction to the same situation. You're intentionally taking the time to think through the scenario, think through the response, and then think through the application of what you're going to do to in accordance to that.
So as we are in the middle here of competencies that build the individual, your young aspiring emergency managers who are thinking about going to school for their degree in emergency management or preparing themselves in some way, these 4 competencies are really the ones you should be focusing on for yourself. You're building yourself, you're preparing yourself, and they're so important before you get to the next tier of the things that build the practitioner. You want to be resilient. You need to have the ability to think in a very critical way, and you need your professional ethics driving you, and your continual learning love. And that continual learning is going to keep you moving and keep you in touch with the constant changes. So, abiding by professional ethics. The emergency management professional both abides by and champions professional ethics. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth later, but professional ethics delineate expected and appropriate conduct, principles, and moral and ethical values that guide practice in the midst of both known and uncertain environments. Ethics must be approached as a totality of principles and not as individual guidelines. Together, the sum of the principles provide an important foundation for action as an emergency management professional. And we have more depth that has been worked on by another committee at the national level on that built on the behavioral anchors of this competency to develop a framework for emergency management code of ethics. And I would, as in the future slides here, I will pop up a slide with the link to the draft of the code of ethics and the draft or the survey link so that you can go to the survey and give us your thoughts on it so we can continue to refine it. Because it's
Well, also
a
just for
document for
information,
the community.
yeah, we'll actually put that too. We'll offer up that link in the notes area as well. So anybody who's interested can go and click on that and it'll take you right to it.
Perfect. And finally, continual learning. The emergency management professional engages in continual learning as a central means of increasing their efficacy when operating in a dynamic risk environment. Continual learning is about building adaptive capacity through an iterative exchange of new information in relationship to your prior understanding. That means you are open to new information that can make you change your mind and make you change which decision you make. And that's really important if you're consistently open to the new information. And those are the 4 competencies that build the individual. There are 5 competencies that build the practitioner. And we termed them as literacies because this is where we were talking about earlier. You can't be highly knowledgeable on every single one of these, but you should have a working foundation, a working basis. So there's a scientific literacy, a geographic literacy, a sociocultural literacy, technological literacy, and systems literacy. And I will give you the definition or the brief definition for each of these. But as you can see, these are where a bulk of the education specialization might happen, but it's really an important part to have these 5 competencies as part of your toolkit because you will be needing them. Living in a dynamic environment such as Southern California, where we are, geographic literacy is essential. You really need to understand what is going on with all our tectonic plates and earthquake movement. But at the same time, we need to understand storm surge and tsunamis and droughts and heavy rainfalls. And we have a lot of dynamics here. So we need to understand the geography of that and what the forces are at play. Scientific literacy. The emergency management professional possesses an understanding of working knowledge of the scientific process, as well as a familiarity with the natural, social, and applied sciences. Diverse science knowledge is essential to inform the management and understanding of disaster risk and vulnerability on local, regional, national, and global levels. Scientific literacy is the capacity to objectively and systematically work through complex problems using the scientific process to identify questions, interpret evidence-based findings to inform decision-making, and effectively communicate the results to policymakers and the public. Through the use of the scientific process and principles in relationship to hazards, risk, and vulnerabilities, practitioners can deliver enhanced value to enable the communities they serve to thrive. All that by taking a few science classes. That is what the impact is having those basic science knowledge. You can really influence your community in a positive way. And the same with geographic literacy. The emergency management professional possesses a foundational knowledge and comprehensive understanding of the geographic configurations of hazard, vulnerability, and risk. Geographic literacy comprises knowledge of the Earth's physical and human systems, utilizing a spatial foundation where hazards, vulnerability, and risk can be conceptualized. The interconnections and interactions and implications across complex physical, built, and social environments can be analyzed to track changing disaster risk profiles and inform decision-making. And again, geographic literacy, the basics of it is essential, but some people very much specialize in that and become like GIS specialists and be able to inform decision makings to a high degree. But the literacy is where we're at. You know, you can specialize like further on, or if you're motivated to that. Sociocultural literacy. The emergency management professional recognizes the social determinants of risk, as both the risk for and the effects of disasters are socially produced. A sociocultural foundation provides the lens to examine and understand human behavior and the individual and collective ways in which humans may affect their relationship to risk, adaptive capacity, and the ability to thrive. So important. And we see when we fail to do that and when we fail to have a sociocultural lens in emergency management, that's where people get forgotten and therefore do not adapt and recover as well. And so it's very important to have.
I think that's one of I think that's one of the biggest ones is the intentional effort to know your area, your community, your jurisdiction, for just that purpose, because that could be one of the things that gets lost most frequently in the mix.
Yes, it does. And if we want more resilient communities, we have to understand the people we serve in the area we serve and help them become more adaptive. So important to have that kind of literacy. And the sociocultural nuances can change from block to block. So you have to be conscious of those and anticipate those and provide extra support for the ones who need it and that kind of thing. And that's where the literacy really is effective for the emergency manager. Technological literacy. The emergency management professional possesses a fundamental understanding of evolving technologies, their relevant application to practice, and the timely adoption of these technologies. Technology refers to the mechanisms or devices developed from the application of scientific knowledge. Integrating emerging or evolving technology into emergency management practice requires an awareness of current innovations, the ability to evaluate their potential utility, the expertise to utilize the technologies, and a grasp of the security measures necessary to protect the technology. That's pretty straightforward, but often overlooked. But emergency management tends to lag in adoption of new innovations and technology. Part of it is too, we need to assess the ethical aspects of their uses, and that is embedded into this literacy piece. Not everybody is going to be the technologically savvy person. They might be more, I want to be out and be a rescuer person, but as we said before, it's the team approach. None of us can make it without our technological support people.
I agree, and I think a lot of it too is not necessarily I mean, there is definitely that hesitancy to adopt new technology when you don't fully understand it, but some of it I think is heavily related to the lack of funding in many, especially when it comes to local jurisdictions, or if you have a one-person emergency management shop, that doesn't necessarily have the correct funding or the knowledge to know where to go get additional funding to fund these types of ventures. Technical, I mean, the use of drones, the use of apps, of mobile apps, the use of software that helps you do better planning, mobile EOCs, web EOCs, continuity of operations plan. All these things, software and technology. But there is some hesitancy by some that because they don't understand it, but there is more too of those who may not be able to get the funding for it. And as much as they want it, they can't get the funding for it unless something happens like COVID.
Well, and alternatively, things that have happened is that there has been funding in the past available for things, but not people. And so I know a number of jurisdictions that have bought a lot of things, and then they sit on a shelf because nobody knows how to use them or implement them or apply them. And that's not helpful either.
That was
So
a
we
big
do
thing that
have to
we
have a
discovered.
foundational knowledge about that interface, the human machine interface. And so that the monies aren't wasted and the technology is not just sitting on the shelf because nobody knows how to use it or nobody's being paid to apply it.
That's what we found with after 9/11 as well. All this money was thrown at defense and prevention and building up all the stockpile of materials and supplies and resources that ultimately went bad because they sat there and no one used them. So no one knew how to use them, or there was no need for them anymore. So that's definitely an area we need to do some
Yes, that
improvement.
should be a lesson learned. And finally, a really important one and dear to my heart is systems literacy. The emergency management professional needs to see the whole picture, particularly the interrelationships of people and the patterns of change. Systems literacy helps the emergency management professional synchronize their understanding and practice with the ongoing shift away from a linear hierarchical human order to one that is characteristically dynamic, complex, and exponential. The focus of systems literacy is on interdependent relationships that produce reactions, changes, and adaptations over time. The scientific foundation provides the emergency management professional a deeper understanding of the present for developing future-focused strategies that enable adaptation and the ability to thrive. Now that's a mouthful, but basically what it says is that organizationally and collectively, we are connected nodes of interrelationships. And in a dynamic environment, changes happen and there are new connections that happen, but we have to be aware of them, understand how the system works. It's much like our human bodies. I like to use the human body as an example, probably because of my initial medical foundational background, but these cells are communicated to with electrical impulses of the positive and negative ions in the interstitial fluid, and that's triggered by the electrical charges from all the nerve endings. And so our whole body specializes into organs, into specific functions, but they're all interconnected and intercommunicated. And if one part has an injury, it lets the whole body know. And it's the same kind of thing. If you think about our communities as a body and the different pieces of it and how we're all connected and talking and need to stay connected and understanding where those important connections are, that's what the emergency manager needs to know. They need their finger on the pulse of the community. Okay, that's my soapbox. Finally, let me close my window. I'm gonna, well, can you mute me for a second? I'll hear. Apologies for that noise. Um, so competencies that build relationships. And this is the really exciting part. Once you've built yourself and you really have your foundational knowledge pieces, this is where the rubber meets the road, where we work on the competencies of disaster risk management, community engagement, governments and civics, and leadership. We This is where we're out doing the work of the emergency manager. First, disaster risk management. The emergency management professional communicates and facilitates disaster risk awareness, assessment, measurement, and reduction across the broad spectrum of stakeholders. Disaster risk management is the application of strategies and policies to prevent new disaster risk, to reduce existing disaster risk, and to manage the residual disaster risk, ultimately contributing to loss reduction, resilience building, and thriving communities. An understanding of how systems interact to create risk, along with the recognition that risk is interdependent with social systems, is fundamental to this function. And see, that's why I'm so passionate about the literacy piece. It directly impacts our understanding of how to interface with disaster risk and reduce it in communities. And this is the key point in this whole symposium is the mitigation of that risk. How do we best reduce existing disaster risk? And a lot of it has to do with understanding the, the network system we live in and using that to reduce our disaster risk and manage it. Like, so the next one, community engagement. Now, this is another really important one to my heart. The emergency manager professional, the emergency management professional is able to facilitate community ownership of risk. Now, nobody likes that word ownership because it means you have to acknowledge it's there. And when you do, you have to act on it instead of pretend it's not there, and you can't be in denial anymore. So I acknowledge that the Newport Inglewood fault runs through the house 3 doors down from me. And I know that I'm in a disaster risk area. And I know that I need to be prepared for things crumbling around me at some point, or at least being really shaken. So that is what ownership of your risk is. Community engagement involves an open dialogue and relationship that develops foster. Okay, let me try that again. Community engagement involves an open dialogue and relationship development that fosters working constructively to reduce the shared disaster risk. The practice of clearly communicating information, giving voice to the unheard community members, integrating divergent perspectives, promoting and supporting individuals, families, businesses, and organizations are vital for building the foundation of respect and support for a thriving community. And the communities that thrive have been well engaged, and they do own their risk, and they do take action and work together. Governance and civics. Now, governance and civics are a tough word because nobody's really clear about what governance is, or I shouldn't say nobody, but the average person is not clear on it. They think government. Civics is something we used to all get informed about in high school, but that has been dropped from our curriculum. So we need to pick it up because the emergency manager needs to understand governance and civics, how to participate with civic and legal processes, from politics to policy. The way society manages their collective processes is referred to as governance. It's about society, it's not the government, which seeks to identify, evaluate, and operate within context of relational dynamics, including those within power structures. Collaborative processes further expand the achievement of public value by bringing people together along the boundaries of public agencies, levels of government, NGOs, business, and civil society. We really need our heads around this if we're going to influence change. And we have a lot of change looming ahead. And finally, but not most important, but not least, and not necessarily most important, there's no specific order to these except for their nested nature, where you want to apply it. Leadership. The emergency management professional is comfortable with leading within and across organizations. Effective emergency management leadership emphasizes team building, collaboration, collective leadership, and communication connectivity to a wide range of stakeholders so that the complex risks can be addressed. Leadership is characterized by informed decision-making, constructive administration, and management techniques, fostering a shared vision, empowering others, establishing communication capabilities across varied networks, and creating an outcome-oriented environment for continual improvement. That's a tall ask for
It
leaders.
really is, but I think too, it brings it back to the how intentional it has to be. It's an intentional effort to do these things.
Yes. So how do all these competencies work together to make us all work better together as the diverse arena of emergency management, educators and disaster researchers? They should support, they're designed to support a feedback loop of learning and a feedback loop of communication where people in practice can tell educators, okay, we are seeing this gap in their knowledge and we can make those adjustments. People in practice can say, we are seeing this huge risk problem, and disaster researchers can look at it, better understand it, and we can inform both education and practice that way. And vice versa. What has been in place all these years is that research does its own thing and then creates new knowledge, and then we teach it, and then it gets into practice somehow, somewhere 50 years later. We don't have the luxury of that kind of time anymore. We need to be informing each other in feedback loops amid all of this, because we're all part of the emergency management endeavor.
There's a huge level of collaboration that needs to be deliberate. It's a deliberate collaboration that needs to take place. And it's gotten better. It has gotten better over the years. We just need to keep going down the road to continue
It has
towards
gotten
progress.
better. But part of the design of these competencies is that we are all on the same song sheet now, and we can communicate better because we have less barriers. And so we should be able to have feedback loops with each other. And it's designed to have that feedback loop. So things are improving in all three sections simultaneously because we're informing each other in practice, education, and research, and not staying in silos, not staying removed, because that process takes 50 years to get the new thing out there. And we don't have 50 years for all the hazardscape that exists out there. So you were asking me earlier about workplace application and how competencies can support the workplace. They can shape the workforce by focusing preparation. They can help focus the efforts of the emergency manager because the education they bring to bear. Um, the building of teams that go back to my discussion with the previous slide is that we can build teams between educators and researchers and practitioners so that those feedback loops are even more amplified. And then that continual improvement piece where when we are getting that feedback loop and testing it in research and testing it in the field and pilot projects, then we can bring it back to say to educators, yes, you've done that right, or no, this needs to change. And that's part of how it shapes the workforce. That's the discussion for the future workforce. However, for existing workforce, we can also change the requirements where the qualifications are put out. So a lot of emergency management positions have their definition put out. They copy the one done in the Department of Labor on the ONET, which basically says emergency managers need to graduate from kindergarten. And that's no longer true. Um, so we need to make some policy changes and get that template change updated. The senior executive service has qualifications that are pretty rigorous. We can look at that. What do managers at this level require? What kinds of competencies and what kind of language do we need so we make sure we're hiring the right people? And then, of course, there's the certification process through IEM and other certifications that people can bring to bear as well. But those again are technical competencies, but technical competencies are important. They're just not core competencies. But in the workplace environment, that is one thing.
I think that boils back down to as well. That boils back down to the intentional. It's an intentional effort. It's making a conscious effort to, and even, I mean, I'm not, and I am personally, I came from, I learned on the job. I came from a responder background. I have over time of learning and taking these courses and certifications and degrees. So I have a little bit of my foot in both the realms, right? One, as a practitioner, one as an academic. But there's a conscious effort that where you have to continue your professional development. And that doesn't necessarily mean having to go back and get your degree, but it does mean going back and learning and staying on top of these things and collaborating with others. And it's a lot of what this presentation incorporated and what I believe as not only as an individual, but as a practitioner and as a professional is it's an intentional, continual effort to be better. Professional, personal, however you want to, in both, in my opinion, that you have to try, you have to make an intentional effort to do these things. And it will do nothing more than create momentum towards the progress that we need to be making as a profession.
I agree. And I come from a similar, practitioner background myself. And then I intentionally went back to school. And then I did more work in the field. And then I intentionally went back to school for my doctoral degree so that I could prepare the future generation, because I was really frustrated with seeing who was being hired that really didn't have the correct qualifications. And when we have core competencies in place for the profession, and then our code of ethics in place for our profession, we can influence now how those definitions are put out there in ICMA, how they're placed on the Department of Labor ONET, what they say, because now we are professionalized, we have these things in place. And it's not just up to the individual. We can act as a collective of emergency managers. And this is not a slam on older people like us who came through other kinds of experiences, we don't have that luxury of time, as I said before, for our new workforce to have to go through that kind of learning curve. We need to prepare them better so they can enter it running on the ground. And that's the goal with the core competencies, is to not only advance the profession, but to better prepare our workforce so they don't have such a huge learning curve. And it's not a threat to those of us who are older, who came from a different route. It's all learning. We've chosen that for ourselves to keep learning, but we don't have the luxury time given our hazard scape and our risk scape. And that's my emphasis there. So if we look at these basic measurement models for the competencies, I want you to think of the tree where the roots are the core competencies. We're rooted into those cores. And those core competencies should be seen through various actions, our behavioral anchors, and those are the branches. And then the knowledge, skills, abilities, the technical competencies all come out in the greenery and the fruit and the flowers. Those are that's my model of looking at it. And I hope that helps some other people.
Very good analogy.
So when we go digging deeper here into behavioral anchors and key actions for education and behavioral anchors and key actions for practice, we're trying to align them so that they can be consistent in both education and the workplace environment. Disaster research has got their own little cup of tea, but they do inform all of us what we need to know better. But we would like to have a better communication channel so we can adapt it earlier. But the behavioral anchors for each of these competencies I've just defined, I'm going to now go into those behavioral anchors, but they are used for measurement and designed as a support tool, both for education and practice. The behavioral anchors and their key actions are specific examples of behaviors that demonstrate competency. The way to measure these anchors has been, it was a process developed in the early 60s by a couple psychologists, and it's proven to be effective. It's not, super rigorous, but it's enough to be able to say we're on the right track. We're on the right track in practice. We're on the right track as a practitioner being evaluated by your boss, or we're on the right track as a student being evaluated by your instructor to see if the instructor is delivering the right competency content. So that's what we use measures for, to make ourselves better. We use measures to say, okay, up your game in this area a little bit more, or Shirley, you haven't been teaching this at a deep enough level and it's not being evidenced in your students. So then I need to go back to my curriculum and look, what can I better do? And make those adjustments. Alternatively, the practitioner can hire a new graduate and then be able to evaluate them and say, wow, they really come in with a lot. I'm so grateful for this. So it can be all over the board, but at least it helps us understand if we're on the mark or not. So the emergency manager's contribution towards reducing disaster risk and building resilient, thriving communities in the midst of high turbulence and uncertain, complex future is going to be pivotal. So built into these competencies is a provision for equipping future managers to foster these resilient, thriving communities. And now I'm going to share an example, a measurement example. You can see it's simple. So I took one competency from leadership and then the behavioral anchors for that. And They're defined, and that's probably too small to read, but it's really just as an example and not a specific thing. And then with either your employee or your student, you can say, you can write out in this area the examples, I should say, in this area, the examples that you've seen in their work or in their writing or in their simulations, whatever, and you can rate it on a 1 to 5 scale and then total it up. And then if it was me doing it, I would use it to evaluate what I was delivering to the student. It's not a student evaluation. But if it was in a workplace environment, the boss could do it and say, and be able to determine if they, how they were performing on that particular topic or not. So that's a basic example of how it can be used in the workplace environment. So now we are going to go from the competencies to the anchors of these competencies, how they might evidence in a person's behavior. So first, the competencies that build the individual. The first one, of course, is operate within the emergency management framework, principles, and body of knowledge. There are 9 behavioral anchors here, and they were all based on Dr. Wayne Blanchard's original principles of emergency management competencies. So that this is where you hear the progressive, the comprehensive, the risk-driven, the integrated, collaborative, coordinated, flexible, professional, and uses the body of knowledge. So we have a definition for each one of these, and it may be too much, I'm not sure, or I can refer them to the handbook.
We can refer them to the handbook, and I'll make the handbook available in that notes area
Okay,
as well.
because the definitions are all each about a sentence or two long, but each one is defined. And so that definition helps you then, and within the handbook, then besides the behavior anchor, under each anchor, then there are specific actions and in tasks that can be evidenced. And at different levels, uh, the handbook shows for education how the tasks might be applied and used as objectives or as a measurement. Uh, you can also use them for the workplace environment, as I showed you, but you would probably want to change the wording or the key actions for an action that's oriented to the workplace environment. So the next one, possessing critical thinking. So the 3 behavioral anchors for that are problem identification and solving, strategic thinking processes, and flexible, innovative, adaptive thinking processes. And those are each defined so that there is no confusion about what those things mean. For example, flexible, innovative, and adaptive thinking processes. The emergency management professional is alert to changing conditions, integrates new information, considers alternative tactics, and readily adapts approaches to the fluctuating disaster risk environment. And that's what is meant by flexible, innovative, adaptive thinking. The behavioral anchors for abiding by professional ethics is respect, veracity, justice, integrity, service, duty to protect, and most importantly for the emergency manager, integrates ethical principles within the stakeholder discourse. Because we are so much about community engagement and pulling community members and different agency and NGO and other community parts together, we are the ones that are responsible for integrating ethical principles in the decision making and the discourse that is happening between the stakeholders. We are the ones that are charged with ensuring that happens because we are the ones responsible for life and property. And so, as I promised earlier, we've built a group of people have come together, and myself and Daniel Scott have been on that team, but there's a team of many people compiling a draft for ethics framework and our code of ethics for emergency management. Actually, I should use the correct term, the draft emergency management professional code of ethics and standards of conduct. And that paper can be accessed at this link. And if you read it, please go to the survey link and give us all the information you can possibly give us about what your thoughts on it are. And all the comments and thoughts and responses will be integrated into the new into a revised document in the next year. But I want to highlight that each part of this ethics framework draft was built upon the behavioral anchors from the professional ethics in the core competencies. So they are interconnected and interdependent, just like everything else. And we can put
Brings you
these
down
in
to the
chat.
systems thinking of things.
Yes. So we can put this into the chat.
Yes, I will definitely do that. There will be these links. There will be links that will take you to these to either the survey or the document in question.
Okay, so moving on from that little advertisement to continual learning. The behavioral anchors of continual learning are reflex questions. You understand confidence levels. Now, a lot of people don't know what a confidence level is. And so let me read that definition. An emergency manager appreciates the importance of confidence levels for the pursuit of understanding, reduction of inquiry duplication, and expansion of the body of knowledge. Now, you know, if we're certain of something, it's at least 95%. If there's less, then we're uncertain, and then maybe the inquiry needs to be repeated or retested or an altogether new approach. But we need to be able to understand what those confidence levels mean. And a good example of not understanding those confidence levels is evidence today in our society with the whole vaccine. Do I trust it? Do I not? Am I confident? They rushed it. I don't know if I can trust it. I don't know if I want to get it. I'll get it anyway. But they know there's been a lot of confusing information out there, and the confidence level was not communicated clearly. How confident are we, even though the approvals got rushed, even though money was invested in something that was already going? We need to better understand it and communicate that so our communities are clear on it and that they can respond and adapt to become more resilient. What we see today with the whole confusion around the vaccine is because we have not clearly communicated what the confidence level of the vaccine is. And this is a good example of what we should avoid in the future as emergency managers. We don't want to create confusion in our communities. We want to create adaptability and resilience in our communities. Okay.
A very good term that I've started using and that was expressed to me is a confused mind says no. So, I mean, we need to make sure that they're not confused, that they understand, that they know all the variables, and so that they can in turn be accepting of and say yes. So a confused mind says no, and we need to stop with the making everybody so confused. Us in turn, us as well, like us as the practitioner, as the academic, as the educator. We need to stop confusing others because sometimes we're confused as well, and we try and portray as if we're not, and that does not incite the confidence not only in us but what we're talking about. So
Exactly.
just my little 2 cents on that.
No, that's perfect. And so then with continual learning is contributing to the body of knowledge that spans disciplines, just like you're going back to school right now. And that's, and the work you're doing is contributing to the body of knowledge. Engaging others in inquiry. I get really excited about dry things like core competencies because I understand how foundationally important they are for us. And that excites other people, and then they get involved. And when we start seeing the pendulum move on this, on how we are more legitimate as a profession, then it's really worth the work. And other people have become involved um, with like the next piece of it, the ethics development. And then maybe another one, another competency, somebody's going to take it further and have further inquiries. We all seek practical application that is for public value. And I think this is such an important piece because the translation of what we know needs to come back to practice for the public value. We are servants, and we need to translate our work into practice. It's essential. I have too many soapboxes. um, so finally, competencies that, or not finally, this middle term, competencies that build the practitioner and the behavioral anchors that connect with those. The scientific literacy, the behavioral anchors are knowledge and understanding, find and evaluate credible literature sources, and inquiry and problem solving processes. With geographic literacy, the concepts of interaction, interconnection, and implications are the triad that glues geography together, and they're about both the physical, the built environment, and the human environment. And all those things are so interconnected. Geography is a system unto itself, and you get systems literacy with geography as well. So understanding those interactions and understanding interconnections and the implications with a geographic reasoning is really vital for a lot of our work. And it's complex because there's a lot of moving parts that come together and move apart and come together and move apart. So it's an essential literacy, and though when you can evidence that those things are being recognized or inquired about or applied, then we know we have achieved that goal or that literacy. And same with sociocultural literacy. The behavioral anchors evident that this literacy exists in a person is when they advance the understanding of others concerning the relationship between social factors and disaster risk intensities. When they cultivate and model an environment of inclusion and diversity where differences are valued and leveraged to achieve the collective pre-disaster capability building and the disaster risk reduction goals. And of course, when the politics and political and legal processes are fair and just. Technological literacy, the behavioral anchors to measure for that reveal somebody who can utilize technology, someone who can evaluate technology, someone who can advance the use of a technology, and someone who can, at least at a basic level, assess the legal, ethical, and social implications of the technology. you were speaking to drones just a little bit earlier, and there's a lot of implications about drone use, airspace and privacy, and a lot of different things. Of course, they add so much value in information gathering, uh, especially post-disaster. They're extremely valuable when humans can't go into a place because of whatever the risk is. They're extremely valuable, but we also have to be mindful of those legal and ethical implications of that technology as well. And again, you don't have to be the go-to expert. I mean, our team always needs a go-to expert, but you have to have those foundational things. And I think this technology becomes less of an issue with the newer generation because they've been around it longer. But yet they need to be able to assess it, evaluate it, and apply it ethically.
I think it's very true, but I also think you just need to not be fearful of it.
Yeah.
You know, some people are afraid because they don't understand, or they don't want to admit that they don't know. So they're a little bit fearful of it. And I think ultimately it's just,
Well, that comes back to
be more
continual
open-minded and less
learning.
fearful.
But that comes back to continual learning, right?
Yes.
So we need to learn and not be afraid to learn.
Very true.
And that improves our decision making. And it improves, and our decision making improves our community. So we're all interconnected and interdependent, and there we have it in another systems lesson. So moving on to systems, the behavioral anchors that can be evidence of someone who understands systems is that the emergency manager will guide the information flow. They'll guide the actions between the parts and the whole. They will understand or guide the understanding of the wider environment and guide the innovation process. We can use the recent COVID to look at the recent and ongoing COVID pandemic to see how there have been lots of information flows, but which one are we supposed to listen to? And then the action hasn't been guided between the parts and the whole. It's been like all the parts have been separated. So we haven't been very systematic about it. Also, the wider environment, there's a lot of confusion about what's going on in the wider environment in relationship to the pandemic. And so we need to really see that we have responded with our information flows in a way that wasn't taking the parts and the whole system into consideration. And instead we've had one part gets this message, that part gets another message, and this one gets another message. And then there's conflict between the messages, there's confusion, and the whole innovation process of stopping the spread becomes halted. And systems thinking is so critical today. Society has changed, and we need to catch up with how it's changed so that we can better communicate with our communities. And that's the long and the short of it. So finally, the last layer, competencies that build the relationship, and the behavioral anchors for disaster risk management are communicating and interpreting the hazards and risk, applying disaster risk management, and monitoring and evaluating and reviews the risk management processes and outcomes. So you can see there is a huge linkage between disaster risk management and systems literacy. We are a system, and we need to be able to recognize, understand, apply, monitor, and evaluate and review in a way that understands we're all connected and the correct information needs to go out. And part of how we do that is through community engagement. And this competency involves key stakeholders as a measure, cultivates partnerships and mutual respect. I really like that one, where we identify opportunities to form partnerships and establish two-way information flow for building both social capital and collective capacity to work with each other. These processes underpin the evolution towards community disaster risk ownership and participation in disaster risk reduction activities. So vital in cultivating those partnerships. Creating public value facilitates a community learning process through dialogue, negotiation, and cooperation in the establishment of collective disaster risk reduction goals appropriate for present and future conditions. And finally, for community engagement, establishing a process for expanded engagement and continual learning. You support the community networks through ongoing improvements of collective disaster risk reduction goals and interventions. Governance and civics. Some of the behavioral anchors for measurement in governance and civics are to consider policy options in relationship to the stakeholders. The political and legal aspect analyzes access to the relational dynamics of and the ramifications from those in position of political power in connection to the disaster risk issue. It considers the legal parameters for collaborative processes and assesses the potential implication and political access, policy and legal parameters, including where to obtain legal assistance and involve legal counsel in the collaborative processes as are applicable to the risk issue. Governance and civics anchor 3 brings people together across sectors. That's pretty self-explanatory. And number 4, they build social capital through collective processes, which facilitates dialogue on the issue, bringing stakeholders together, guides exploration of options, negotiates differing views, cultivates shared learning, and builds social capital in the establishment of shared goals. And finally, number 5 is implementation. You support that collaborative process and implementation cycles, and then evaluation and continual improvements. Supports the process of continual improvement through monitoring, evaluation, and implementation of improvements with a mindfulness of possible unintended consequences. Those are all our governance, civics, community engagement, policy processes are very critical to our work. And some people are more specialized than others, but we should all have a foundational competency. Now, finally, leadership has 4 behavioral anchors. They inspire a shared vision. A leader creates an empowering environment, not a toxic environment. A leader resolves conflict. And a leader makes strategic decisions that influence others towards change. And those are measures that you can really define and assess the leadership.
I think this one's one of my favorite ones, leadership in general, because I think it's one of the most understudied aspects of what it is that we do as emergency managers, because it is intentional. Most of you're just a natural born leader. Well, you might have some aspects of being a leader, but you're not just a natural born leader. You decide to be a leader, and it's an intentional effort that you make. But I think one of the things that I like the most in what I'm looking at right now is with the behavioral anchors is the resolves conflict, but it doesn't say discourages conflict. conflict can be a very good thing when done right, but it resolves those conflicts in a way that that is productive. And as I've said many times, progresses and encourages momentum. But this is one of my favorite things, something I study myself, and I encourage others to study. And it's one of the what I feel is one of the most understudied, um, not only concepts but skills that are out there. It's a skill that is developed and it is learned and it is practiced. It's not one that you just wake up knowing one day.
Yeah, that's true. And I see leadership as a nested thing too. And it goes very similar to the competencies. It starts with the individual, then it goes out to the organization you're embedded within, then it goes to your community, and then it goes larger to the meta community. And you can lead, and that's why we say lead within and across, because you have to lead within, you have to lead within your organization, and you need to lead across as well.
Yeah, and that's very important too, because most emergency managers, emergency management professionals aren't in necessarily positions of authority. They're in positions of leadership and influence. So they may not be at the able to be at the top of the food chain to make these decisions. They have to influence those decisions to be made, and they have to lead in many cases, the middle of the organization, and at all different. They're leading up, they're leading down, they're leading sideways, and they're leading and influencing those that are outside their organization as well, in developing those partnerships and the collaboration.
And a leader is not necessarily a high administrator.
Very true.
A leader is how you are leading people in your community. And in this case, how are you leading your community, inspiring your community to reduce the disaster risk? And that is what we're talking about. And so I'm going to thank you for your time, for letting me come share these competencies and why they're so important, especially for the future, the development of our future workforce, because we need to be able to prepare them faster and not send them through the school of hard knocks. But you can read the core competencies at this site, and you can also read the draft code of ethics and standards of conduct at this site, and then take the survey this site. And I thank you so much for all of you for reading those things, for advancing them into practice, and really making our profession move forward as a profession.
Well, thank you for the amount of time spent in developing this presentation, going deep diving into these competencies and how they are interrelated and work together, and like systems that you love so much. But the sharing of this information and of your time with us as those who are watching this presentation, but in general in helping promote the growth of our profession. So thank you so much for your time. As I've said earlier, these links and these resources will be shared for you to be able to have access to. And you have given us so much for our watchers and of this and our those attendees to go away with and actually study more. So I appreciate that very much.
Yes, everybody keep learning, and that will make our profession even better.
All right, so
Thank
I'm going to wrap up. Yeah, thank you very much.